I've been talking quite a bit recently about the feeling of meaning, drawing largely, I think, on Eugene Gendlin's book. I can't remember the title again, where he talks about, how meaning isn't just about the relationship between symbols. It's also accompanied by this kind of felt sense that we understand it, and we sometimes apply it in ways which are inappropriate and all that kind of thing. But I've also been looking at another book, one by Robert Burton, called On Being Certain, which is great actually. It's got a subtitle, something like Why You Think You're Right Even When You're Wrong. My wife saw that and she thought it was terribly appropriate, because she says I always think I'm right even when I'm wrong. She's probably correct. But in many ways it has some kind of parallel themes. Its approach is very different. Robert Burton is from a neuroscience, I think it's from a neuroscience background. He certainly cites a lot of neuroscientific and brain science research in support of his ideas. And basically what he's saying there, as I say, paralleling Eugene Gendlin, but in a different register, is that this feeling, this knowing that we have, again, like meaning in Gendlin, has two components. One is this kind of flat recognition that a truth, that something is true, and therefore you know it. You know, I'm looking across at this tree, the tree is undoubtedly there, that's true, so I know the tree is there. But it's not a kind of completely flat, uninflected knowing. I couldn't reduce that to a series of symbols on a chart. It's also accompanied by the feeling of my knowing that the tree is there. You would have a hard trouble convincing me that the tree wasn't there, telling me it was a mirage, or telling me that I was hallucinating, or that I was in some kind of Matrix VR simulation thing, whatever. You'd have trouble convincing me of that, because I have the feeling of knowing that the tree is there. And what Burton says there, and he gives a lot of evidence to support this, which is great, is that just like meaning, this knowing thing can also become detached. So you can know something without knowing that you know it, without the feeling of knowing it, and you can also have the feeling of knowing something without knowing what it is that you know, which is really hard to explain. The second one is probably a bit easier. It gives examples like the tip of the tongue sensation. When you meet somebody and you know their name, and you know that you know their name, so you've got all the feeling of knowing, but the knowing isn't there. You can't pluck the name out. So that's the feeling of knowing. Or he also cites déjà vu, which I think might be a bit different, but the feeling of recognizing a place, but not knowing why you recognize it. And to a certain extent, intuitions, knowing that something is the right thing to do, or that something's going to happen, without knowing why that you know that, or what that thing is exactly. So that's that kind of component. He also says that the other component, which is where you know something, but none of the feeling of knowing that is correct. And he says that comes up quite a bit in things like Capgras syndrome or Cotard's syndrome, where and these are neurological conditions caused by lesions in the brain or some kind of brain damage, that kind of thing, that produce an odd sensation where, I think it's Capgras syndrome, for example, your mother might walk into the room and you know it's your mother. You absolutely know it's your mother, in the sense that everything about her is the same. You recognise that it's her, but it's not accompanied by the feeling of knowing. So it doesn't feel right. Something funny is going on inside you, or not going on, I suppose. And the result of that is that you become convinced it's an imposter, that someone's pretending to be your mum. And as I say, Burton gives a few of those examples, and drawn from other neuroscientific studies like blind sight, that kind of thing. So we have the knowing, and then we have the feeling of knowing. Normally they coexist under normal circumstances, but occasionally they free float. And there's some interesting things about that. He says if we're in a conflict, or if we're presented with a kind of cognitive dissonance between a fact that we rationally know to be true and where's my phone going off, and the opposite, I'll get it back in a minute, and if we're presented with a fact that we rationally know to be true, but it's not accompanied by the feeling of knowing, then we'll believe the feeling of knowing. We won't believe the rational argument. And the example I just gave about Capgras syndrome is a symptom of that. even though, you know, you can rationally understand that this is your mother standing in front of you. She knows everything about you. Her appearance is exactly as it's supposed to be. Without that feeling of knowing, you'll still say it's an imposter, even though nothing logically supports that. Yeah, I think that's some really interesting things about that. He talks about all kinds of things in relation to cognitive dissonance and how people invent all kinds of strange things to support their feeling of knowing. He brings in mysticism and religion associated with that. You know, that belief and religious faith is a version of that. You know that God is real, and you know that He created the earth in 7 days, and all the evidence, all the evolutionary evidence in the world will not make you change your mind.